Yeah,
Great.
AI is not good at drawing hands, apparently, like for generative images, and it's not good at math.
We're still working those kinks out.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's move to the next slide. Okay, so not to cut off conversation, Todd. So want to keep flowing with what you're saying with the privacy and security, with numbers in general. There's kind of these hiccups and caveats. I love the way that you framed this in your workbook, with the caution and caveat you have to hold when you're working with AI. So like you said, numbers up at the top, you're not going to want to be focusing on ChatGPT to be crunching your budget for the year. And I would love for you to kind of walk us through the four caveats that you highlighted in your PDF.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, as you say, the data going into ChatGPT, you need to be careful about what you feed it. OpenAI, as much as I like them as a company, has not been super forthcoming so far around how they are protecting data, which has led to things like Italy saying, no, we forbid anybody from using ChatGPT, in their space. So thinking about the privacy of your company's data, anything proprietary, anything deeply personal, you probably want to leave out of putting into these systems. Like anything on the internet, it can be hacked, and chances are it probably will be at some point. So thinking about the security of that information, especially like I work with organizations that have sensitive, personally identifiable information from people, and you don't want to include that information. Like if you're going to have an AI analyze any of that stuff, you better take steps to anonymize it to the extent that you can. Also bear in mind that these large language models, these generative AI tools, are biased because they're based on the data that they look at that's there, and that includes racial, ethnic, sexual orientation biases. All of the worst things that make up humanity in many cases can end up influencing the AI algorithms that are in there. So bear that in mind, and you may need to apply correctives to these things. It's one of the reasons why I think a lot of the early chat experiments from Microsoft and others, people would get in and start testing the language model, and those language models would start to say racist things that just are highly problematic for any kind of tech-based system.
Yeah.
So I think ChatGPT has done a fairly good job, and I say that with big quotation marks around it, about trying to cut off some of those biases. But
Yeah.
it's a caveat. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think the interesting thing too about what you're highlighting, Todd, is that similar to when building a community, you have to be aware of bias. And so in these large language models, we're not pulling this information from thin air. Rather, it's this accumulation of information that is primarily created by other humans that are going to have biases baked into this. And so when you're seeing this at a large scale language model, it's important to keep in mind topics that you're asking it about and what the biases around that topic might have. So I know early on in those chat GPT days, like you were saying, there was a lot of bias originally, and I haven't tested it recently with chat GPT, but around gender expression. And so just bear this in mind when you're working with the AI, especially for folks who are working in advocacy spaces or in spaces that you have a marginalized group, that it needs representation, just to make sure that you're not taking ChatGPT at its word and accidentally perpetuating a bias. So that's an important flag.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I'll mention, because we're talking about data here and some of the data biases, some of the questions in the chat are around getting data into platforms for analysis. So what can I use to upload 3 interviews and ask AI to pull out common themes? Well, chances are there are limitations on how much data can be put into these platforms at a given time. So for example, with ChatGPT, it talks about a maximum of 4,096 tokens for a single prompt. That doesn't equate to characters. It has to do with like the overall input into the system. So to do something like what you're suggesting, Rebecca, it would take like probably several different inputs and then asking it to go back and kind of look at all of those at once. I think those token numbers are going up, that as these platforms are developing, they're getting better at taking more and more input. But taking multiple sources in is an interesting animal, and even getting like data in a Google Sheet examined. I know that Google is rolling out some tools for data analysis, and that some Google tools will be able to apply some of the analysis directly from within the Google suite of products, for example. So that was Stephanie's question. But yeah, there are definite limitations on that. I will mention one other tool that I've been using for content creation is called contentatscale.com. which can take multiple source document inputs and create completely original, plagiarism free. They promise 100%, and I put no stock in that, because again, trust but verify. But they can create like long form blog entries based on just you giving it a URL or uploading a PDF or giving it several documents as resources for it.
That's incredible. I'm definitely going to check that one out too. So, Todd, I think for the latter half of your cautions and caveats, anything you want to touch on with misuse of AI generated content and ensuring human oversight?
Yeah, no, I'll just say like a quick anecdote about misuse of AI generated content. I think it's absolutely possible to misuse it. Um, I am a longtime tabletop game hobbyist, and as part of what I do for that, putting together role playing games would be I've sometimes I've asked ChatGPT to be the villain in a piece that I'm writing, and I'm telling it to act, very Machiavellian, and take the negative view of anything that is put in there, and it's made me realize as I've been going through that, like there are some real world bad actors that could do some bad things about like persuasive content that is covering over factual information or reinterpreting things in a way that that is manipulative to people. I think we need to be wary of those kinds of misuses of the platform, and really just ensuring that there's always human oversight for this. This is not, as much as somebody could create a fully automated online community managed by a chatbot, I don't think that would be an advisable thing. I think that the going forward value of having AI-based tools in our tool set is that they become a partner that we work with, that helps us with a lot of the things that were previously very odious, repetitive, difficult tasks, just in terms of assimilation and the amount of time that we have to put into it and the emotional labor that goes into it. That's what they're really good at.
Yeah, absolutely. I couldn't have said it better myself, Todd.